Okay, so I think for most of you, this is straight up review. And especially if you're a dairy farmer and you've had an inspector on your farm, it should all be familiar. So only about 12 slides here. It's going to go pretty quick. But what I want to do is not only reemphasize the required records, but also talk a little bit about the compliance path and how you can avoid that by maintaining your required records. So quick. Let's see here. My down button is right there. So I guess I need to preface this because it's going to change a little bit. For any facilities that have a CAFO permit, required records are going to be different. So I'm speaking to you all as though you don't have a CAFO permit, which you don't right now. So keep that in mind as we go forward. So currently we have laws and rules in place that clearly define what records are required. So there we go, laws and rules. There are 5 different types of records. And the reason we require all 5 of those different types of records when we're on your facility is because we need all 5. We connect those dots when we're looking at the records to help understand how you're managing your manure at an agronomic rate. So 5 different kinds of records. Regarding the compliance path associated with record keeping, it's the same as if you had a discharge to waters of the state. We follow the same type of path. We start with technical assistance. If we can't help you correct that record keeping issue with technical assistance, we can move to a warning letter, then to a notice of correction, and actually to a notice of penalty. Same type of path that we follow when we're talking about discharges to waters of the state. So you can hop off that record keeping compliance path anytime simply by talking with one of us and making sure that we can help you get back on track with required records. All right, records. So nutrient analysis. This, as Nicole has pointed out, nutrient analysis, that's for every single type of nutrient that you're using on your farm. So liquid manure, solid manure, if you are applying it to meet crop nutrient needs, we need an analysis. Generally, we like to see these in the spring. And now, again, overlapping into looking at CAFO land, you're going to have them in the spring to do nutrient budgets for your different fields. So nutrient analysis, all sources, 1 time a year. Annual fall soil test. Post-harvest nitrate test is required annually according to our existing rules and regulations. And again, a little bit different from what we're seeing in the CAFO, but we have always had a target of 30 parts per million fall soil nitrate. We don't want to see any more than that in your fields. If you get above that, what we call our target, and get up to our threshold of 45 parts per million, we step into a technical assistance path with you. So we work with you, and you're going to hear this a lot, especially as we start talking more about the CAFO permit, adaptive management. We want you to start thinking about how you're applying manure, what happened to that crop that maybe didn't take up all the nutrients that you put on, what happened to the nutrient analysis, maybe it wasn't an accurate analysis and you put too much manure on, more than what your crop needed. So thinking about how you can stay at or below that target level for your fall soil nitrate test. The other nutrients that are required, a complete soil analysis every other year. So all of these other parameters for soil test values, we require them every other year. A lot of this information we see, or at least I see in my region. I'm also an inspector for the Southwest region, everything south of I-90 and down to Clark County. A lot of my facilities do this every single year. We don't just see the fall soil nitrate test. I see it all. And that's because they say, well, I want that information on what potassium levels my soil has. I want that information every year. The value of the complete test, again, is largely for you. For us, we want to see phosphorus levels and fall soil nitrate levels. Application records. This is kind of a sticky one for a lot of folks because there are a lot of things required. When you look at the rule for application records, there are a whole bunch of little buttons that you've got to check off. Bottom line, where did you put the manure? When did it go on? Why did you put it on there? Did your field, your soil test, or your crops actually need the nutrients that you put on? how much did you put on there and what did you put on. You just kind of keep that how, when, where, and why in mind, and that will probably meet our requirements for application records. If you have the other records, we can go back and get some of that other information that we ask for, such as the nutrient value or how much nitrates you put on your field, total amount of nitrogen and phosphorus for each field for each year. We can back calculate some of that stuff. So application records, and one of the things that we are still seeing missing on our application records is a record of weather. So when you are applying manure, you are also supposed to be recording the weather 24 hours prior to the application and the day of the application. If you're talking about any kind of a winter application, maybe outside of the normal application parameters, we want you to look 72 hours out. It is not a rule, it's not a law to look 72 hours out, but think about what Nicole was saying about using that manure spreading advisory. Use common sense, use the tools that you have in hand to make sure that when you're applying manure, you are not making a risky application. So as far out as you can go looking at weather to reduce the chances of a runoff caused by precipitation. A lot of application records that I see in my region are simply kept on a calendar. So when I show up at a dairy and they give me their 5 years worth of records, I'll get a stack of 5 cow calendars. I'm happy with that if they contain all of the information. So whatever you can do to get that information in one pile and give it to me when we show up for an inspection. Nutrient transfer. This has a lot to do with where your manure is going. A lot of times in the last probably 4 or 5 years, we've been getting questions about how do you follow the manure? Well, this is one of the ways that we follow the manure, is by your nutrient transfer records. This is also one of the ways that we don't have to ask you separately every other year for a registration work. We're now collecting this during our routine inspections. All of this information is coming in during a routine inspection. So you're not getting that extra little piece of paper every other year for telling us where your manure is going. So date of transfer, how much you moved, what was it, who received it, and you are supposed to have a nutrient analysis of the manure transferred. If whoever you're transferring that manure asks for it, you should be able to hand them that nutrient analysis. Irrigation records. Right now, the irrigation record requirements are pretty darn vague. It says, tell us what field the irrigation went on and how much water you put on. It is pretty vague, but what we want to see, again, as Nicole mentioned earlier, that irrigation can be similar to precipitation, where it could be the hammer that's driving your nitrates right on down below your root zone or causing runoff. So in large part, this requirement is to get you to think about what water is going on your field and where that water is helping to move your nutrients. And obviously, keep your plants alive, but we're talking about what's going on with the nutrients there. So again, this word adaptive management, as you start looking, if any of you are going to be doing following the CAFO permit path, you'll be hearing more about adaptive management. In a nutshell for us, it is what you do to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of the Dairy Nutrient Management Act. If you find yourself stepping off the compliance path with record keeping or with collection, containment, and storage of manure, what are you doing to change your actions and get back on the right path? Some things that you can do to help us understand when we come on your farm and start looking at your records and we maybe see a little bit of an elevated nitrate level. We don't know why. Let's see, if you look down at the 2015 row, you can see that there are a lot of fields there that are all above our threshold levels, above 45 parts per million. That's really high. And there's 2 fields there, the 3 north and the 4 south, that obviously more than 3 out of 5 years worth of records have been elevated. Well, why is that? In general, there's a trend. But in 2015, if you guys remember, it was darn dry. It was just hot and dry, and plants, the crops didn't grow like they were supposed to. We saw elevated nitrates all over western Washington in 2015. If you can document that your crops did not thrive and pull as much nutrient out as you thought they should, and that's why you have elevated nitrates, that goes a long way towards telling us that you're paying attention to your crop nutrient needs. It tells a little bit more of the story. And guess what? Your inspectors will use their common sense and their discretion to keep you off that compliance path. So it's those additional records, your story of how you're managing your nutrients, that help us understand what's going on in your fields and make sure that you're staying off that compliance path. That's it. Is that pretty much the same that you've been hearing for the last couple years, those 5 types of records that are being required? It all sounds pretty familiar? Okay. That's it. So now Kyrre's going to talk a little bit more about what those records mean when he's looking at them on your farm.
Sweet. Cool. Thank you, Chery. So I'm going to give you some, just some examples, really. Examples of what I see out on your guys' farms in record keeping, some of the different styles that you've shown me, and to challenge you to come up with something even better. Let's see. Yeah, so Chery did a really good overview of what we're looking for as a program. And I'm just going to try and show you, well, here's what I'm actually looking at as an inspector when I'm out there, and what we're discussing as we're talking about record keeping. So I don't need to go over this again, but she just gave you the main things that we're looking for here in the record keeping list. So in terms of options, when you're trying to display all this for me, when I'm out there on inspection taking a look at your binder or your stack of papers or whatever it is, if it's on your computer, I've seen a lot of different things, ranging from the notebook that's covered in manure that hangs out in the tractor cab to the high-tech thing that you've got on Google Docs that you can pull up on your phone. But really, there's any of these options are acceptable. You don't have to. You don't need to make it too complicated. If you don't like, if you're not a smartphone guy but you do a really good job with keeping things on napkins, you can keep things on napkins. But like the notebook, for example, like that works really great. Calendars, like as Chery mentioned, calendars, and just marking on there the dates that you applied, what place you put it on, how much you put it on. You're knocking off several of those pieces of that record-keeping story just by marking it right on a calendar. We've got some great consultants that do a good job of putting it all together in a nice, coherent picture for me, and that serves you guys really well too. But then you've also, down here at the bottom, there's a couple of softwares out there that can be helpful for that. I don't know too much about CaffleWeb, but I know that is a paid version that can provide a lot more information on nutrient balance. And then ODARC stands for Online Decision Making and Record Keeping. It's something that was developed out of Oregon. It's free. You can go on and create a free account and play around in there if you want. And it's one way of keeping all of your record keeping in one spot. And it meets like 99% of what I'm looking for as an inspector. So, yeah, so those are kind of the mediums in which you might keep records. For application records, I think what I see working the best out there is application records for individual fields on individual sheets. So if you farm 6 fields, what I'd like to see is 6 documents that have, each field has a list of, manure that was spread and, your crop uptake, your yields, tells me what your crop was, what year we're talking about, and so I can get the whole picture, the whole story on that field in one spot. That is when that's what makes it the easiest for me. Being able to tell that whole story is really useful. For example, this screenshot here in the bottom right hand here, this is straight off of a field sheet from a dairy that, this shows you can see, applications starting in March and ending in October, and I've got the rate in gallons, I've got the method that was applied by, and then over here, kind of cutting off the pages, a breakdown of nutrients that were actually applied per application. And so this gives me all that information in one nice table. And you know, the rest of the sheet would have the other things like the year that this was done on, and you know, the crop and what the expected or what the crop yields were, that sort of thing. So this is a really nice format, just putting it in a table. Again, just trying to give you some examples of what I see and what is most useful for telling that story. Chery already talked about the calendar, but again, you know, you can block out some space on your calendar where, okay, I started applying on this day and it went through this day, and I put 50 tons of solids on field 3. I even used the ARM worksheet, and it was low risk. And so you can write all that stuff on there, and that, you know, that captures the rainfall. You can basically tell that whole story on your calendar, which works really well. Caveats to that one: use the current year. Don't use a calendar from 10 years ago because the dates don't match. So, and only use one calendar per year. It gets really confusing when you start doubling up. So, weather's a big part of it. Really, you know, how can you show that it was a good time and place to apply? For starters, what does your farm plan say? If you're farming fields that you've been farming forever, chances are your farm plan is pretty darn accurate in terms of giving you reliable agronomic application rates for those fields. You know, so you should be starting there, and that's a basis for you saying, oh, this justifies the amount of manure that I'm putting on these fields. But you can also look at the forecast and say, oh, well, I put it on here because it's a safe time to apply, or I put it on in this, you know, this time in February or March because that's when I'm going to get the best nutrient utilization for my crop. Write that stuff down, record it. It's real helpful for justifying where you put stuff. And of course, as Nicole said, worksheets. Great thing to print off and have in your records. Really shows your due diligence to get this stuff figured out. Each of you who are here today have your name on a certificate of completion out there on the table. That's another really great record to stick in your book. That shows me that you guys are doing trainings, working on demonstrating your commitment to nutrient management. Nutrient analysis. Chery talked about what the requirement for this is. I think that one thing that I see commonly enough is the bare minimum, which can be as little as one manure test a year. We know, you know, especially if you've got a lagoon or liquid storage, you collect a lot of rainwater throughout the course of the year. That the contents of your manure fluctuates quite a bit across the year. And so if you're figuring all your nutrient application rates based off of that one test, and it happens to be taken at a period in the year where your manure is ultra concentrated, well, then you might be over counting for things or under accounting for things. So yeah, maybe just, you know, every other year alternate a little bit, kind of give yourself a range of values to work with so you can make an educated guess of what's actually going out there. Or better yet, take a test every time you pump right out of the back of your tractor or right after you agitated your lagoon. That gives you an actual number to work with. And then you can figure out exactly what you put on. I'm going to skip that one. Yeah, so for the annual fall soil test, so there's a couple things that I'm seeing a lot of soil testing sort of missing the mark in terms of timing. It's tough because, you know, across Western Washington, basically all the soil tests need to be taken at the same time, and that's a lot of tests that's a lot of course to take out in the field, whether you're doing it yourself or you're hiring somebody else to do it. But unfortunately, there's a lot of tests that are being taken after that, you know, 5 inches of rainfall on silt-based soils, or 3 inches of rainfall after sandy soils, or on sandy soils. Make that test work for you. If you're taking it after a bench of rain, it's just a number that isn't all that helpful to me and a waste of your money. You know, try and take that test at a time that's going to be appropriate, that's going to give you information about what's actually going on in your field. Make it worth my time, make it worth your time. And in fact, if it is, you know, if you got a test that shows that, you know, you've got hardly any nitrate left in your field at that time, at the appropriate time, and you've got more pumping to do. Say you took your test in early October, you might be able to get out there again on a nice grass field, sandy field, something warmer year where you're going to get some more utilization of that those nutrients. Yeah, obviously watch the forecast and try and anticipate when you got to be out there to take those tests. And if applying after you've taken your post-harvest nitrate test, adjust accordingly. Don't put all your manure on your field that had the highest soil test value. yeah, Chery gave you a list of the complete soil test stuff that we're looking for. You know, all of this is really easy for you because the lab just sends it back to you and it's all right there. You don't have to transcribe it anywhere or anything like that. Manure transfer records are important. That can look, you know, that can be a nice table in your book like this. You know, you can do something like that. I'll show you the next slide real quick. Is a table that, this is from an N3 Consulting record sheet. You know, just list it out real easy, real simple, easy for me to figure out how much manure went to what producer and or realistically how much total left the farm, because that really helps us understand the balance of the farm. You know, liquids broken up from solids, and then, you know, it also accounts down here in the red box, you know, pickup truck loads amounted to 50 tons. Well, that's a lot. I don't need you to list out every single person that showed up with their pickup truck here. Just, you know, just try to account for the sum of that. Things that manure that's being hauled out in amounts bigger than a pickup truck, I'd like to see listed out. So, yeah, it can be a nice table in your book. It can also be a notebook on the dash of your tanker truck if somebody's just pulling up and taking your truck for a spin around their field. So, but account for what leaves your farm. And then spring soil tests. Especially for some of my producers who rotate a lot of their fields out with other farmers, it seems just sort of like a no-brainer to take a spring soil test if you're getting a field back out of potatoes or in some other crop. Just know what you're getting back. You know, if you're getting something back that's got some sort of high residual amount of nutrients in there, just be able to account for that when you make your budget for that year. Especially, and I think this really matters for guys who are rotating a lot. Know what you're getting back, and the other thing about the spring soil test, which can be really nice, is you can use that as your field sheet for all of the records you want. Like what I've seen that works really well is you get that spring soil test back, and you're like, okay, and I'll figure out how much commercial I'm going to put on or how much manure I'm going to pump on this field. You can also write, you know, you've got the date on there already, you've got the field name on there already. You can start writing, okay, I got this crop yield at the end of the year, I put this much manure out there. Bam, you've got all the stuff. You can write the weather on each of your manure applications, and you've got one sheet that's got all the information on it. That works really well for me if you're kind of going for that one sheet method. Chery mentioned irrigation. If you irrigate, just make sure that you're writing it down. You can do it with, you can combine it with your nutrient application records. That seems to work pretty well. But that's an important record. And then, yeah, really, finally, that's it. I think that you guys have, again, Chery said that you guys have heard all of this, and a lot of you have different ways of doing it, and I'm willing to meet you halfway there and try some different ways too. Like it's just part of the job is I get to see everybody's different way of doing it. But yeah, I challenge you to come up with even better ways. You know, find something that's not on my list that works best, and make it as easy as you can, because it can be a lot of work, but however you can do it to make it work for you is going to work best for you, and it's going to make it easy enough for me. So.